Faces of Alaska. Rosita Wuerl.
Throughout her life, Dr. Rosita Wuerl has been a fighter, an anthropologist, and an activist. She's made it her life's goal to preserve Southeast Alaska Native traditions while building a collective future for Native people throughout the state. Her early life was full of drama. She has been kidnapped, she has fled from an arranged marriage, and she fought her way through high school. But Dr. Wuerl persevered through these hardships, and those early memories have remained an important part of her history. I sat down with Rosita at her home in Juneau to talk about her progression from being a young child to her current role as president of the Sealaska Heritage Institute. Let's start at the beginning. Can you tell me a little bit about your childhood?
Well, our family had moved down. I'm from the Chilkat area, that's Haines and Klukwan, and we moved down to Petersburg to earn some money. And so I was raised down there. And in Tlingit style, they give a child to grandparents, and that it's kind of like our social security system. The child grows, is raised by the grandparents, and when they get older, that child will take care of grandparents, and so that's our custom. But my grandparents didn't believe in school. I wouldn't say school, but actually they didn't want me to be around white people or non-native people. So I didn't have to go to school. And my brothers and sisters who were living in Petersburg, they went to school. But I would have so much fun, playing around, doing things. And while they were all busy going to school, and the government welfare people didn't think that was right, to have this little girl running around and not going to school. So I was actually kidnapped and brought by a welfare lady. She had asked me, "Do you want to go and visit your brother?" And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that I would have to get on a plane. So I was brought from Petersburg and to Juneau. And in Juneau, I guess they had been gathering Indian children from a number of villages. And so all of us were put on the Princeton Hall and brought to Haines House. It's a Presbyterian mission school. And, I didn't know what happened until the time that I got, was when I was going towards the plane in Petersburg. And I heard the cab driver, who knew our family, and the cab driver asked, "Don't you think we should tell her grandparents that you're taking her?" And the welfare lady, Mrs. McGilton, said, "No, keep driving on." And then that's when I knew something was wrong. And that was when I started to fight, but I was subdued.
About how old were you then?
I was 6 or 7 years old. So I was packed away and went to Haines House.
And how long were you there?
It took my mother 3 years, and this would be my mother in Tlingit style. In Tlingit style, sisters, you have sisters and they have children, and the children of sisters are viewed as brothers and sisters, so there are 12 of us, and we were raised together as brothers and sisters. So my mother was actually my biological aunt, and my mother had died when I was 4 years old. And it took my mother 3 years to get through the bureaucratic red tape to try to get me out. I mean, I had family, I wasn't an orphan, but the intent at that time was to civilize and Christianize American Indians, Alaska Native children. So I was put in that home, and there are a lot of sad issues, associated with growing up in Haines House for at least those 3 years. But yet, I have happy memories of my childhood, but those things are still with me, the challenges that I had.
Rosita learned how to fight for Native rights from an early age. When she was 10 years old, Rosita joined her mother in a crusade to improve living conditions for Southeast Alaska Natives. Your mother had a reputation as an activist in her own right.
She was.
How did? Can you tell me a little bit about her? How did she?
Yeah, she didn't have much of an education, but she was a very smart woman. And she saw the labor conditions, but she would go through from community to community to organize the unions. And I used to go with her. She, like I said, she went to school, I think, through the 6th or maybe even 8th grade. And so I would record the minutes. And I remember when we'd have to go on strike, And that was hard for our people, because we wouldn't go to work because we were trying to, you know, increase our salaries and our living conditions.
And what was it like being a 10-year-old going to these meetings and helping out with this?
Well, it was really interesting, you know, because you were meeting different people from the different villages, but you were hearing all the same common themes. You know, we weren't getting paid enough. We had to live in these houses that were really shacks, didn't have running water. At the time, we didn't even have, our stove was, you know, wood stoves, but you could look across the street and see the white man's bunkhouse. You could see the Filipino bunkhouse, and there was a hierarchy. The Filipinos were actually treated better than us. And then, of course, the white people, you know, they lived in the best bunkhouse. So we were, you know, throughout our whole region, you know, we were seeing this kind of disparity among Native people and others. So we were trying to say, okay, we although maybe it's good and healthy to chop wood, it can be a chore, you know, and burdensome. So we wanted oil stove. So it was, you know, really working for basic utilities, running water, oil, even toilets in our house, you know.
As a young Native woman, Rosita faced discrimination everywhere she went, from the primarily white high school in Juneau to the male-dominated fishing boat in Petersburg. She quickly learned to fight back.
Did you get into any scuffles as a kid?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I remember one fight here in Juneau when my sister and I were walking by a restaurant, and there were 3 non-Native girls sitting in the restaurant, and the girls came out and they said, and I remember this so distinctly, you know, they said, "Smile when you look at us." And my sisters and I said, "Smile? Okay, we'll show you what a smile is." So we got in a big scuffle. And we were going to be thrown in jail. And at that time, Frank Peradovich, who was a Native state legislator, came by, and he saw what was going on, and he told the police, if you're going to throw the Native girls in jail, then you're going to have to throw the non-Native girls in jail as well. So, you know, fighting was a way of life, really, unfortunately. I went to the Juneau High School here, and we had a lot of scuffles. I didn't get to go to the Native school, Mount Edgecombe, where all the other Natives went, because my mother said, you are going to have to learn how to get along with non-Natives, and so you need to go to the white school. So, and going to the white school was, you know, you had to learn how to fight, so I did.
I guess, can you tell me more about what it was like going to the high school here?
It was hard, but I was fortunate in that I was smart. And so I think that gave me some stature, but I was very isolated, you know, not a lot of Native kids went to our schools, and so, you know, I was by myself a lot, and end up in fights, but the other girls, you know, they tolerated me, I guess, and again, some of them are, you know, my closest friends today. But at the time, there was, you know, the distance, you know, the separate worlds that we had. And then, of course, the other thing was that I began to realize we were poor. And and that was apparent, you know, in our clothing. And I'd have to work, you know, after school. I used to pick shrimps here in Juneau. And I'd, you know, have to go down there, and, you know, and you come back. And I know my sister was sometimes, she'd be hiding, you know, from some of our schoolmates, you know, that we'd run into.
How was the transition from living kind of this village life to being at Haines House to being in Juneau, which, while it's, you know, it's not the biggest city in the world, I imagine it was a little bit more bustling at the time. Is that accurate, or what was that like?
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely. We thought Juneau was a city. You know, most of us who had come from smaller communities, smaller villages, thought it was a bustling city, but it was also a separate community. I mean, natives and non-natives, and this is where you see the non-natives in a larger number than in the villages. And it was difficult. I mean, there were hard times. We weren't allowed in certain areas, or we weren't welcome in certain areas. And, you know, I recall going into a library, and we you know, the librarian put paper towels across the desk, and didn't want, you know, the Native children to come too close because she thought we were dirty.
And this was in the 1950s,
Yes.
right? Before statehood and also before the civil rights movement.
I was commercial fishing, and when you're 14 years old at that time, women weren't allowed on boats. But again, my mother, you know, she let me go and fish with my uncle Homer, and I went down to fish in Petersburg and in Cake.
Can you tell me a little bit what it was like to not be able, with the expectation to not be able to go out on a boat? I mean, how did you kind of learn how to fish? And
I mean, that was just our cultural customs, because women have certain powers at certain times. But I was just fortunate that I was able to get through that barrier.
were people, after a while, did people kind of accept that you were doing this? Or was there skepticism about your being involved?
No, I mean, I think there was, you know, I think they began to accept it. It was unusual, but they got used to seeing me around.
Her personal crusade for Native Alaskan rights has taken her halfway around the world, but Rosita's life would have been completely different had she not run away from an arranged marriage, forced against her will.
When was the first time you really left Alaska for a significant period of time?
Actually, that brings us to another kind of episode in my life, is that I did have an arranged marriage. I was, and I remember when it happened, I was 13 years old, and my mother called me out. I was actually fighting with some guys, and I had tied them up in a net underneath the house, and my mother called me out, and I crawled out from underneath the house, and she said, this person and I have made this arrangement that you're going to get married to Paul. And I said, but Mom, I'm just a kid. And she said, well, no, we've decided to let you finish high school before you have to get married. So as soon as I graduated from high school, you know, I ran away and I went to school. That was where I went into Fairbanks. And then my sister had a baby, and so I went, you know, to go and help my sister out. And at the time I met someone, and I ran away with that person and ran outside of Alaska to Seattle.
I mean, did you ever get to know the person you were supposed to marry?
He was wonderful to me. I mean, he was older, but he would...
How much older?
Oh gosh, I don't know, 10, 12 years. He was like an adult, but he would take care of me. I mean, in terms of, he would buy me school clothes, and I remember once he bought me a dresser set, you know, with a mirror and hairbrush, and all my sisters were so envious, and I put it out on the table, and we'd all look at ourselves in the mirror, and I remember it was gold with red, you know, something red on top, you know. So he bought me things that we couldn't afford in our family, bought me clothes, and he would also send in food, native food he lived in Angoon at the time, and he was always really good to me. And I met him years later, and he told me that, he says, I'm glad we didn't get married. He says, I'm glad because you were able to go on and go to school and do things for our people. And he was good to me about that. But his mom used to tell me, you should have married my son. But and then when I started getting into our Native political office, he would help me run for the board. You know, he supported me, got his family to support me. He'd kind of like campaign for me. And we became good friends. And I never was formally introduced to his wife, but I met her later on. And
I bet she was happy that it worked out the way it did, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think we established a bond. You know, when he became ill, he was dying, he told my sister went to visit him, and he said, could you ask Rosita to call me? So I called him, and she answered the phone. It was actually the first time I'd ever talked to her. And I had said, well, could you just tell him that Rosita called? And she says, wait, let's see if he's awake. And so I was able to talk to him for a few minutes, and and just say how much I had appreciated our friendship and his support of myself. And life is very strange. One of my girlfriends found this bracelet, and she's into jewelry, and she found this bracelet in a pawn shop. And she said, I think you're supposed to have this bracelet. And I bought it from her, and we looked on the inside, and it had her name in it, the wife. And so in the ceremony that they had for him, in Tlingit culture, we have a number of different ceremonies, and one of them is held a year later. And so I went over to Angoon to participate in that ceremony, and I was able to return this bracelet that she had lost. So it's kind of a neat story, I thought,
In the time period from when your mother told you that when you were 13 that this was going to happen to when you finished school and you decided that it wasn't, was there any point where you were sort of resigned, that you thought, okay, this is my life, this is what I'm going to do?
Oh, well, you mean to be married, to have the arranged marriage? Nope, I never thought that. Life was it was exciting. There were lots of new adventures, At the time, to me, they were adventures, and I remember he had told me, I'm going to build you the biggest house, in Angoon. And I just couldn't see myself, living in, just staying at home. And I wanted to explore.
After receiving master's and doctorate degrees from Harvard University, Rosita focused her anthropology work on preserving Tlingit and Haida cultural traditions. But she soon realized how difficult it was to stand back and study Alaska Native history when her true desire was to step in and help her people build a sustainable future.
I always say that it was an exciting time for me. I always describe it as someone opening up a curtain, and I was looking into a whole new world. And I would go to law school, I went to business school, I was enrolled in social sciences, and I was majoring in anthropology because I wanted to understand how the world worked, I wanted to understand how institutions worked, and I wanted to be able to figure out how do you change those institutions so that they are more compatible with Native American lifestyle and values.
And was that always with the idea of coming back to Alaska?
Yes, always with the idea of coming back and working to change those institutions so that we would be allowed to live as Native people, continue our cultural practices, our cultural values. And one of the things that I did was I looked at the exhibits and I said, oh my God, how come they have us all looking like these stereotypes of Indian people? And of course there were no exhibits at that time on Southeast Alaska. So I said, I'm going to do an exhibit. And I had no idea what it meant. But I had a great department and great professors who were supporting me. And so I was allowed to do an exhibit. And I did an exhibit called Tlingit Ani, Enter the Tlingit World. And what I did was I did a traditional ceremony and a potlatch, and so I used myself as the mannequin and my son, and I had 3 children when I went back to school. And so I had mannequins made of myself. That proved to be really good because I finished my 3 years of graduate school, and then I went and did my field work in Barrow.
Your work has always kind of been at the intersection of sort of anthropology and activism. Yes, right. And how did you wrestle with that? There's the debate over, are you going to study a culture and be impartial, or are you going to be an advocate on behalf of that culture? I had really good professors, and that's something that we were taught. It was taught objectivity, and in fact, one of my colleagues who
was studying anthropology. One of my very good friends was, he was studying anthropology, and he went to, can't remember, it was Indonesia, but he got engaged in the politics, and he was immediately thrown out of school. And so, I mean, that was a stark lesson for me. But we were actually taught, you know, objectivity. And I remember my first experience going to Barrow, where I went into one of their feasts. And I started looking around. I said, well, where are their clan leaders? And, you know, why aren't they? And I caught myself, you know, that that I was looking at that society through my own lenses. And I had learned a lesson early where I had brought someone home with me. I brought one of my classmates here to Juneau and then up to Chilkat area. And I was missing a lot of things because I was so immersed in my own culture that I wasn't able to see what was happening. And my colleague kept asking me questions, and I found out that I wasn't seeing everything because I was living it. So it was a lesson of objectivity that I learned. But I lived in Barrow for 2 years, and I did field work up there, continued to do field work for about 10 years. And it was when I realized that I was becoming friends with people, that where it was becoming very personal, that I decided that, you know, it was time for me to leave because I couldn't do good anthropology. But at the same time, I had also adopted my own ethical statement, where I had said that the knowledge that I gain from wherever I study, the community that I study, has to benefit that community. Because I had already seen so many anthropologists who had gone into indigenous communities, had left those indigenous communities and had, you know, achieved a very successful career and never looked back at those communities that they had studied. So I had said that my knowledge has to benefit that community. At this point in time, I don't know that I understood applied anthropology or public policy anthropology. I just started doing that, where the knowledge that you have is used, you know, to benefit that community. And so I continued to do that. And then that kind of, I started to move into the political realm, the advocacy or activism. And that was when I started to get on different boards. And there's where I left my anthropology behind. But I had learned the valuable lesson of knowledge and how knowledge can be used to change things.
Throughout her career, Rosita has served on many committees, boards of directors, and political commissions. Her early experiences as an anthropologist, an activist, and a fighter have helped Rosita every step of the way. And her fight continues to this day as she works to preserve cultural traditions and subsistence ways of life for the next generation of Alaska Natives.
What have been the biggest political fights in your life so far?
It's probably subsistence. You know, I've served as the chair of the Alaska Federation of Native Subsistence Committee, probably going on 15 years now. And I think it's where Native people really are trying to, you know, saying this is their last stand, you know, for their cultural survival. I thought that decision, you know, in the Yupi case where they recognize the spirituality of Native people is a significant, you know, statement. I mean, it reaffirms an earlier decision, but it nevertheless that in 2013, we have a judge that says Native religion exists. And I started off my story by talking about where I was brought. I was kidnapped, you know, and taken to a mission school to have that nativeness, you know, wiped out of me and to be transformed into a civilized, Christianized girl. And then here today, you know, to say that having the courts recognize that.
So are you seeing sort of diversity being promoted kind of in a spirit of the law way, but there's still work on the letter of the law? Is that sort of?
I see that in almost every domain. I see it in education, where we've said, all the pictures in the books, all the curriculum reflects white society. But now our work at Sealaska Heritage Institute, are trying to teach teachers about diversity, and we're developing cultural materials, curriculum materials to try to get that integrated into the classroom. So it's that cultural diversity issues, run the full spectrum from the political arena to the educational arena to the economic arena, and on. I think, the Walter Soboleff Center, the construction of it, I think it signifies an important time in our state, in our city, where we say, Native people, cultural diversity exists. And that's a good thing. I mean, I received a note from a friend today, and she says how different this is from the time we were growing up, where Native people weren't recognized, where we didn't have a presence, where they were trying to change us from being Native people to here where, the governor of Alaska is celebrating, cultural diversity. The mayor of Juneau is celebrating cultural diversity. State legislators were there. I think that's a good statement, for Alaska. We still have a lot of work to do, but I'm optimistic, that we've made at least that turn.
And what's your biggest hope for Alaska moving forward?
Well, I want to see Native people survive. I want to see them survive as distinct cultural entities. I want to see the non-Native people have an appreciation, a true appreciation for cultural diversity.
We have lived on this land for 10,000 years, and it is